Hello, everybody. The season is upon us. Wow, can't believe it. We are 24 hours, less than 24 hours away, depending on when you're listening to this, to the Brewers season officially beginning. So we have a digital-only Brewers Weekly here. I'm Dominic Cotroneo. Thanks for joining us wherever you may be listening us from. We will be live Thursday night after opening day. Not immediately after the game, but 8 o'clock Central Time, recapping the game with our regularly scheduled Brewers Weekly. Then we will have post-game shows live Saturday and Sunday after the games. Forecast looks good, knock on wood, right now in Yankee Stadium as we're getting ready for the season. So this is your, let's fire up the podcast, hit the record button, and let's just preview the season. What are the things, actually put it all in one spot, we are looking out for? One of the games I want to play here is just simply more, less, the same on some of the numbers that were really important to the Brewers' success last season. We also are going to look at everyone's ZiPS projections and basically what I say on a scale of 1 to 5. I'll explain it later. 5, you are important, that we need these numbers to be as good or better than this. And down to 1, it's like, we're probably not going to see much of you, that sort of thing. We also just going to quickly predict the opening day roster because even since the last time we talked last Thursday, things have changed there. And then I've got a thing here, a little couple of bits that I want to talk about. I'm a golf fan, as y'all know. I'm going to call this the Signature Series. If you're familiar with golf, they got signature events and like premier events that aren't majors. So let's point out each month's Signature Series to point out a few to like, hey, we really got to pay attention to these games here too. And then I've got a few radar picks as far as who's on the roster, who's not on the roster, guys to keep an eye on for the rest of the season. So tomorrow, we are ready to go. First pitch, Yankee Stadium. I personally won't be there, but we got you covered on the radio call here on WTMJ. Also, it is on ESPN tomorrow. It is not on FanDuel Sportsnet. So if you're somebody that likes to sync your television, make sure you sync it to ESPN. And if you do decide to watch, Bill Schroeder is going to be hanging out with Joe Buck and Joe Girardi on that call on ESPN. And then we'll be there, obviously, on Saturday and Sunday, too, as Jeff will slide over and do opening day with us. And then it'll be Lane and Josh on Saturday and Sunday. With all that prelude stuff out of the way, we get closer to opening day. We'll talk about home opener once we get there. But simply put, here's what the opening weekend rotation looks like for Brewers and Yankees. Opening day, it's already been well covered. Freddie Peralta versus Carlos Rodon. And when you look at this on paper, it's like, wow, Rodon had a good, not great season last year. Freddie had a good, not great season last year. Pretty interesting matchup. We all know how the Brewers feel about lefties, and they'll see another one on Saturday. Max Fried gets the ball against the Brewers lefty, Nestor Cortez, facing his old foes. It'll be a rocket environment at Yankee Stadium for that one. And then finally on Sunday, it'll be Aaron Savali getting the ball for the Crew. I imagine now that Clark Schmidt is going on the injured list for the Yankees, and that's official, looks like it's going to be Marcus Stroman probably, since Schmidt's on the IL. They've got Will Warren. They've got Carlos Carrasco. Still to be figured out for them, as Garrett Cole's obviously missing the year due to Tommy John surgery. That changes things up for the Yankees. That's just your weekend. And remember, you have that rain-out day Friday. It's probably not going to rain on Thursday, knock on wood, so we're looking good there. And then you come back home for the Royals. That's just your real quick. That's what's coming this weekend. Again, Brewers Weekly, Thursday night, and then post-game shows Saturday and Sunday. Let's actually look ahead to the whole season here. And a reminder, the Cubs have already played 2 games. They're 0-2. But the projections coming into the year, once again, have the Central, just like last year, as the tightest division in baseball. I know a lot of folks like to beat up on the division and beat up on what's to happen. I do think there is one flaw in the Fangraphs projection of what to expect from the Central. It's that the Cardinals are going to flirt with 500. I don't believe that's going to happen, especially if they trade away pieces during the year like we expect them to, and the way that they approach this season. They do not view 2025 as a winning type season, trying to get things in motion for Chaim Bloom to take over next year. But here's the Fangraphs projection right now. 82-80 for the Cubs. The division winner is not going to be one game above 500. Let's make that very clear right off the bat. This division is deeper than that. It has the Brewers one game back at 500, 81-81. Then the Pirates and Cardinals tied at 79-83. Again, I told you about what I feel about the Cardinals. And finally, the Reds at 78-84. When it comes to odds to win the division, They're giving the Cubs a 1-3 chance and the Brewers a 1-4 chance, and then the rest are sprinkled into the teens for the Pirates, Cardinals, and Reds. For playoffs, the Cubs are given a 45% chance just to make the playoffs, and then a 36% chance for the Brewers to just make the playoffs. I want to have a bone to pick with this one. I talked about this at the end of my segment on Thursday's show of our last Brewers Weekly from spring training. I do not see a scenario where a wild card team comes out of the Central. I really don't. You got 3 wild cards, okay? And between what the Diamondbacks have done and the Padres continue to be a force, they were, they had the Dodgers on the brink. You can't count either of those teams out. The Giants have reloaded, but I don't know if they've done enough. That's just the West. Then you look at the East, the Mets, the Phillies, and the Braves. All 3 of those teams not only could win the division, but move into the playoffs, which means you've got 4 teams of the 6 I just mentioned. 4 of the teams are not going to win their division, and they're going to be high up in the rankings when it comes to their standings, which is why the division is the priority for the Brewers, and it always is, and that's going to be their ticket into the playoffs. I want to make that very clear. I do not see a wild card scenario, barring injuries and anything that could happen in the rest of the National League, but I really do think the NL Central, once again, will be a one-team league, and that's not a hot take by any stretch of the imagination. Let's go ahead and predict the opening day roster, but it'll lead me into a larger conversation about the 40-man and the depth that the Brewers have right now. The first thing that we learned since the last time we spoke is Mark Canha has been traded to the Kansas City Royals for cash or a player to be named later. They guaranteed him a spot on opening day, and they guaranteed him a roster spot, which is why you do it. You do it for the player. Next, Manny Margot was released. He was brought in as depth right around the Blake Perkins injury happened, just in case another injury went down, that they would be covered in the outfield. He has been released, and he signed a big league deal with the Detroit Tigers. And finally, a few options here that are notable before opening day. Andre Monasterio, optioned to the minor leagues. Tyler Black, optioned to the minor leagues. And Caleb Durbin, optioned to the minor leagues. What all this means is the Brewers, and it's already been made official, Vinny Capra has made the team. He is the utility player. We know Oliver Dunn made the team. It was just kind of a formality that if he would or wouldn't make the team, but he is going to be on the team. And quite frankly, probably not going to play on Thursday or Saturday, given they're facing back-to-back lefties from the Yankees. And talk about that a little bit later here as well. But the fact that Capra can play all over the infield, and specifically shortstop, that ability is what got him the job over Caleb Durbin as a utility role. I do know for a fact they like Capra's defense at third more than like Durbin's defense at third. And if you imagine the first 2 games of the year facing lefties, that had to factor into the decision. The other big factor into the decision, we've talked about it all spring, Vinny Capra not having any options. So if, for some reason, Vinny does not get off to a good start and has struggled with the bat, and maybe Durbin hits the ground running in Nashville, you could see that switcheroo very quickly, and Vinny Capra would be subjected to waivers because he does not have any options. With that being said, I think Durbin is still going to be a very important piece on this team this year. I'll explain more in my 5 players on the roster that are not on the opening day roster that will help the Brewers significantly in 2025. I have that segment coming up in just a moment, but that's the big news when it comes to the options here at the end. We are still waiting to see. It seems pretty much certain at this point, unless a move is made that we do not foresee, that Isaac Collins is going to make this team. And hand up, I did not have him on my radar at all this spring. Nobody has played more innings on defense than Isaac Collins this spring, as he has tried to learn left field. The reason why they want Isaac Collins around, he is the bridge between right now, opening day, and Blake Perkins returning. Blake Perkins, switch-hitting outfielder, much, much, much better defender than Isaac Collins in the outfield. But Collins also gives you some emergency cover on the infield. I don't think he's above Capra on that depth chart, but let's say something were to happen, somebody needs to come out of the game. He can play the infield in a pinch, even though all of his work has been in the outfield this spring training. So with that being said, let's start with the position players of who is on my projected opening day roster. And this doesn't need to be released until Thursday morning. I believe it's 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. Eastern time is when it needs to be formally submitted to the league. So you may see it later than that. Just keep an eye out. That's why it sometimes takes a while to get the opening day roster. But on the position player side, The easiest position to project, the catchers. William Contreras and Eric Haas. We caught up with Eric Haas in our last episode. Encourage you to listen to that here in the Brewers All Access podcast feed. On the infield, you got Rhys Hoskins. You've got Bryce Terang. You've got Joey Ortiz. You already mentioned Vinny Capra. Oliver Dunn, already mentioned him. And I've got Jake Bauers making this team, especially with Mark Canha being traded and Tyler Black being optioned. They're not going to go into the season without a backup first baseman, and that is Jake Bauers' role, who also can play the outfield in a pinch, which Mark Canha was not going to do for the Brewers, and the trade makes that a lot easier to digest for the crew. So that's your infield picture. Hoskins, Terang, Ortiz, Capra, Dunn, and Bauers. The outfield, Christian Yelich, healthy, good to go. Garrett Mitchell, healthy, good to go. Sal Frelick, Jackson Chourio, and Isaac Collins. And when you look at it, Collins, I'd be shocked if he starts on opening day. I think he's more depth. I think they'll roll the dice. Having two left-handed outfielders in Mitchell and Frelick, Yelly can hit lefties. That's not a problem. In fact, he went yard off Jose Quintana last opening day against the Mets. I think they're going to roll the dice with Mitchell at least at the start of the year and get some sample size of him against left-handed pitching. I don't know what they want to do about that with Oliver Dunn. And that means on the position player front, the only position player that's going to be on the IL to start the year is Blake Perkins. On the pitching side, this is where things get interesting. Adam McCalvy noted in his roster prediction that Chad Patrick would make the team as a starter. I think this is an either-or, Chad Patrick or Logan Henderson, but perhaps they wait to make that move. They carry an extra reliever at the start of the year and then call them up in that first week when they actually need him, maybe in that fourth or fifth game for the Brewers when they come back home. So don't be surprised if you don't see Patrick or Henderson, whomever they choose, on the 40-man roster because they're on the 40-man to make their big league debut in this opening week, because it is very clear Jose Quintana is not going to be ready like we projected. Maybe he could be if you want to have him, on a pitch count and only have him throw 3 or 4 innings in the big leagues. No, they're going to take it extremely slow with him, further reinforced by the fact of the news on Tuesday that Jordan Montgomery of the Diamondbacks, he's going through Tommy John surgery now. This is important because the Brewers, I've said it again and again, the Brewers are being patient with Quintana because they know they need a full season out of him. There is no need to rush him in April if it risks him for injury, and then you're really up against it come June and July if he's injured. So they're going to give Quintana plenty of time to get ready. You remember Jordan Montgomery was one of the Boris 4 clients last year that waited until the very end to sign, and it really hurt his year and had a terrible season last year for the Diamondbacks, and now he's hurt, and that's going to end his Diamondbacks tenure. With that being said, that's the reason why Chad Patrick or Logan Henderson is going to make this team, and or, quite frankly. But I don't think it's going to be both. I think it's going to be one or the other. So, again, Peralta, Cortez, Savali, you mentioned that as the starters. So the relievers, this is where it gets spicy with Abner Uribe. I mentioned this last Thursday. I'll say it again. I really do believe the Brewers are leaning on having Abner Uribe serve his suspension at the start of the season. Just get it over with. He's going to miss the first 4 games of the season, but with that off day on Friday, you get to replenish your bullpen. So in theory, anybody you pitched on Thursday, you can pitch again on Saturday. And then anybody who pitches on Saturday can pitch again on Monday, or everybody has pretty much done a back-to-back. They can't pitch Saturday and Sunday, but then they're down for probably both Monday and Tuesday, but then, hey, Tuesday is when Abner Uribe returns to the team. On top of that, you have multiple swingmen that are going to make this roster. Now, at least one of these guys is probably going to start Game 4 or Game 5 for the Brewers in Connor Thomas, Tyler Alexander, and Elvin Rodriguez. They can start a game. They can give you 3 innings of the bullpen. They're that unsexy role, but innings eaters at the start of the year that are so important for the crew to make sure that their arms are built up by the end of the season. For the rest of the bullpen, it's not much to really worry about with Trevor McGill, Yoel Payamps, Jared Koenig, Brian Hudson, and Elvis Peguero. You may notice, of course, no Nick Mears. He is starting on the IL, so he has to spend the minimum 15 days down due to a sickness and illness that ran through him in spring training, lost 15 pounds. It was ugly, kind of like what Mookie Betts is going through right now. Not fun to deal with that sort of thing. So he's going to start the year on the IL, make sure he gets his time to build back up. Pitchers on the IL that will start, Tobias Myers, but the good news is he's already off a mound again, and the Brewers expect him back at some point in April, but again, has to spend the minimum days on the injured list. Then you've also got the mentioned Mears. Brandon Woodruff will also start the year on the injured list. I imagine, though, they keep him on the 15-day IL because they don't want to put him on the 60-day, and in the event that A, he's needed sooner than anticipated, or B, he's ready sooner than anticipated, they're able to throw him straight into and activate him once he's got a few more innings under his belt down in AAA and in minor league games. DL Hall is still a ways away, and more on him in a moment. Jose Quintana, already mentioned him, and finally Aaron Ashby. This is where Ashby's IL status is important. The Brewers' 40-man is full, and if Jake Bauers is going to make this team, there needs to be a corresponding move, and one of those corresponding moves can be to 60-day IL Aaron Ashby. Now, he had not been playing catch by the time we had left spring training last week. Maybe there's an update by the time opening day rolls around on Ashby, but he is definitely missing opening day, and if he's not even playing catch yet from his oblique strain, he is at least a month away from really throwing multiple innings, which is why you would even consider putting him on the 60-day because they want to keep him as a starter as long as possible. On the DL Hall front, I will get this out of the way now. This is my massive, flaming hot take. Can't believe you're saying this, Dom, and I said this to some of the beat reporters, and they thought I was crazy. But this is my I'll go down with the ship take if this goes wrong. But I just have this vision and this theory and this belief, and maybe it's irrational, in DL Hall, that DL Hall is going to be an impact reliever for the Brewers in the second half of this season, a la the way Aaron Ashby was for the Brewers last year to make sure they got into the postseason. I really do think that this lat injury that Hall went through, he's playing catch again, is going to be important to keep him available. And if you can shift him to the bullpen to finish the year and get him back quicker, shorter stint, maybe his velo ticks up and he finds that role, I think now is a great time to put DL Hall in the bullpen. So I'm making that claim here on March 26th. I really do believe DL Hall will make an impact in the second half of the season as a reliever. Because when you look at it, if things go according to plan for the Brewers in the second half, your rotation should read like this: Freddie Peralta, Nestor Cortez, Aaron Savali, Tobias Myers, Brandon Woodruff, and Ashby available too if things go according to plan for him. Or maybe a Chad Patrick or Logan Henderson find their footing in the big leagues and stick around like Tobias Myers did last season. You never know with injuries, but that's a pretty darn good rotation. And I didn't even mention Jose Quintana. So let me read that back. Freddie Peralta, Nestor Cortez, Aaron Savali, Jose Quintana, Tobias Myers. That's 5. Woodruff's your 6. And Ashby's available as a 7 if somebody needs a day. That's a pretty darn good rotation. I'm very excited about that. That's my quick peek at the opening day roster. Now, let's talk about the 5 that are not on the opening day roster that I think will help this team in 2025. And the most obvious one is Brandon Woodruff. Woodruff is up to 95. He threw 2 innings in a minor league game the other day. He's going to continue to slowly build up. He's bound for Nashville, probably starting every 6th or 7th day. They're going to take it very, very slow with him. There are a few more hurdles and plateaus for him to clear. So, for instance, let's get to 3-ups. Let's get to 4-ups. Let's have you, pitch on 6 days rest. Let's have you pitch on 5 days rest. Let's have you pitch on 4 days rest. These are all things that are on the radar for Brandon Woodruff, and he knows patience is the name of the game to make sure he's ready in the second half of the year. He's told us all spring long, judge me by the second half. Don't judge me by the guy that first returns. But the fact that he's already touching 95 multiple times in March tells me that A, he's healing, B, he's getting stronger, and C, in theory, he should get better. Because when I first saw his bullpen when we came down to Arizona and he was topping out at 91, 92, and there was some oh-no's, but he was encouraged by that, that kind of told me, okay, he knows this is going to take a while. He's still fighting through the scar tissue. The real panic button would be he starts out at 92, 93, and then falls to 88, 89. That's when we get worried and we're like, ooh, what's going on here? But the fact that he's fought through his first plateau, there'll be another plateau where maybe he sits at 94 and doesn't get past that. We'll continue to monitor that throughout the first month and a half, 2 months of the season. But maybe he's back in May if things go according to plan. Next on the list, mentioned him already, is Caleb Durbin. Durbin, again, with that Vinny Capra situation, with no options, if Durbin can find his footing in Nashville and find a way to produce, get on base, we know he's a guy that has the ability to draw a walk, and a walk turns into a double because of his speed. Yeah, he can get hit by a pitch. He got hit by a handful of pitches this spring. I just felt it, and I know Pat Murphy would never say that, Durbin was pressing, but I just felt that Durbin was the new guy on the block this spring training. He's a great attitude about this whole new situation. Guy traded for an all-star closer with Nestor Cortez, coming to a new team. Hey, man, let's see what you got. And maybe gripping the bat a little bit too tight, trying to make a little too much happen, a little too rigid. And I think Rick Sweet and the team down in Nashville is going to unlock him, let him relax, let him understand you are going to play in the big leagues this year. And that's why Caleb Durbin is one of my 5. That's number 2 on my 5 that are not on the opening day roster that are going to help the Brewers. Next is Jose Quintana, aforementioned with the injury to Jordan Montgomery, and guys that have been signed late in spring training. Traditionally, if you rush it back, they get hurt. So I don't want to spend too much time on Quintana. We know how valuable he could be, especially as a ground ball pitcher in front of this elite Brewers defense. So that's number 3. Number 4 is the opposite of Chad Patrick or Logan Henderson, because in my projection, I have one or the other making this roster. So if Chad Patrick makes the roster, that means I'll pick Logan Henderson as somebody that could and should help the Brewers at some point in 2025, or vice versa. If Logan Henderson makes the roster, Chad Patrick's the guy that I think can help out the Brewers, because both of them really turned some heads this spring training before minor league camp opened up. We had an interview with Chad Patrick earlier this spring. Make sure you give that a listen here on Brewers All Access. And then finally, number 5, of course, Craig Yoho. We haven't even said his name yet. Yoho was very impressive in spring. We talked about it in the last episode that he was optioned, what went into it. At the end of the day, he's going to pitch in the big leagues. There's not a doubt in my mind, and he's going to be successful in the big leagues. And relievers, you always need more than you think. And Yoho is going to be somebody, maybe even by the end of April, that is in the big leagues because he keeps doing what he's doing down in AAA Nashville. 13, 14 innings in AAA last year? I mean, it was a rocket year that he started the year in Appleton and made his way up to AAA. It was a fun season for Yoho, and he's easily my number 5 that will help out the Brewers that are not on the opening day roster. Okay, and then one little bonus bit here. I got 3 more guys that are on my radar that are not on the 40-man roster right now, meaning they would have to be – this is really out there. They're on the radar. I'm not saying these guys are definitely going to play in the big leagues this year for the Crew, but I got 3 names here that I really think could help the Crew. First of all, Casey Hunt. If you haven't seen the cutter, go find it. The Brewers are going to probably send him to AAA Nashville, especially with the news of Henderson or Patrick being available on opening day. Casey Hunt, not on the 40-man roster yet. Keep an eye out for him. Minor league co-pitcher of the year last year. Came up to the big leagues to receive his award and see everybody. I'm excited to see what Casey Hunt can do this season. Next, Brett Witrowski. Saw him in the spring breakout game. We've seen him for a couple of springs now. The Brewers have been big fans of him and his frame. Again, not on the 40-man. Depth move. Somebody goes down, 60 days, something. Keep an eye out for that. And then finally, a name that really wasn't on my radar at all until the start of spring training and a couple of weeks in. Reinel Delgado. The Brewers got Delgado in the minor league Rule 5 draft from the Guardians. So the minor league Rule 5 is different from the major league Rule 5, meaning you don't have to make the big league roster, but the same protections apply that you have to be plucked from another team and X number of years, all that stuff. I don't need to bore you with the minutia on that. But Reinel Delgado can play all over the infield. Great eye for the plate, switch hitter, the type of things that, a utility man can really have a feather in his cap if he has a good ball strike and he's able to hit from both sides. And Reinel Delgado can kind of be the infield version of Blake Perkins, in my opinion. But again, not on the 40-man roster. There's a reason they like him. He had a really good spring, and I'm excited to maybe see what he does in AAA Nashville this year. So those are some bonus, guys. Let's wrap up the roster part of this segment with going through the 40-man roster. And there's a few guys that are not on the 40-man roster on this list I'm about to give. On a scale of 1 to 5, how important are you to the Brewers season and matching up with your projections and having a strong season? 5 means you are important. You're going to be starting in a playoff series. A 4 is like you're still very, very important. You are also probably starting in a playoff series, but the Brewers can understand there's pieces around you that are important. A 3 is just everyday contributor. You're going to probably play in a postseason series too, but, your production is not paramount to the Brewers' success. A 2 is, hey, you're an important depth piece. You're somebody that Brewers obviously admire to keep you on the 40-man roster. And then a 1 is, hey, you're emergency depth. If somebody gets hurt in the big leagues and you come up, that's where your role is filled in there. So let's start on the offensive side of things, going from 1s to the 5s. The first one I have here is Jefferson Caro. Not much to be said other than he's going to start the year as a DH, which kind of set off some alarm bells in my head of like, ooh, after a labrum surgery and a guy that had been known for his arm in the minor leagues, let's hope that recovery happens quickly for him. He's going to be DHing mostly in AAA before he ultimately catches, hopefully, in the second half of the season. So he's a 1. Another 1, depth view in my eyes, is Brewer Hicklin. He came up briefly last season, still waiting on that first big league hit. But when Blake Perkins returns, Brewer Hicklin will remain a 1 and need to figure out what he does. Next, a 2s are Vinny Capra, Tyler Black, and Andrew Monasterio. Tyler Black needs to get reps at first base, which is why he was optioned to AAA Nashville. If Reese is going to play as many games as you hope he's going to play, Tyler's not going to get that opportunity this year in the big leagues. And I know it may be frustrating in the moment to see Tyler Black go back to AAA, but he needs work defensively to make the Brewers comfortable giving him the first base job, assuming next season when Rhys Hoskins inevitably goes to free agency. Next on that is Vinny Capra. Already mentioned, hey, if it doesn't go well at the start of the year, he's out of options. He'd have to go through waivers. But if it does go well at the start of the year, great. You've got a right-handed infielder. You're not banking on production from him, but he had such a strong spring. He is somebody to help out the crew. And then Andrew Monasterio, depth, still important. He always seems to come up when you need a right-handed infielder. Maybe you have a stretch of lefties coming up and you want to call him back up to the show. He is going to be important for the crew. I'm already putting Jake Bauers in the 3 category, and here's why. Now, not technically on the 40-man yet, but he's in my opening day roster projection. Backup first base, still a very important position. Reese is going to DH. Yelly is going to DH, meaning maybe days that you want to give Garrett a day or Sal a day, whomever. Jake can play the outfield in a pinch, or if there have been pinch hitters or changes, he can play left field in a pinch, whatever may happen. You can never have too much depth, ever, ever, ever. So Jake Bauers' positional versatility makes him a 3. And I went ahead and put Isaac Collins as a 3, too. I know that may be surprising, but if they're considering keeping him on this bench on opening day and to be somebody that, yeah, he can be right-handed and play the outfield while Blake Perkins recovers, that's an important piece. And if he hits the way he did in AAA last season, he could stick around a little bit longer because both he and Perkins have options remaining. Isaac Collins, minor league Rule 5 pick from Colorado 2 years ago, last year in AAA, elite walk rate at 14%. Stop me if you've heard that before from the crew, that they're able to have a guy with a good ball strike. He had a 125 WRC plus, which is 25 points above league average. Love that for him. In 113 games in AAA last year, 14 homers for a guy that small, but also 28 doubles and 7 triples. There's a teeny bit of slug in there, and 24 steals in AAA last year. So I wouldn't say they're banking on his production, but if he's going to make this opening day roster, they know there's production to be had in there. Also on the 3 list, I got a couple more guys here. Blake Perkins falls in that same category because he's starting the year on the injured list. They would welcome any sort of production from Blake Perkins, but his value is obviously his defense. Eric Haas, he's going to play a lot more than you think this season. William understands he needs to DH more often this season and maybe take a few more games off behind the plate. They trust Eric Haas. They understand what he can do at the plate, and he's become a heck of a play caller. He's important for the crew. And the last 3 on this list is Caleb Durbin. Mentioned all the things we already mentioned about Caleb. Hey, you're going to play in the big leagues this year. Get right in AAA Nashville. Make sure that you're going to be ready when your name is called, and come make your big league debut for the crew. A few more position players here on the 4s and the 5s. Sal Frelick, he's a 4. Oliver Dunn is a 4, and Bryce Terang is a 4. The reason why these guys are all 4s, they're all left-handed. How much of a leash are they going to get against lefties this year, especially in the case of Bryce Terang? Given last year he didn't even start opening day against a lefty in Quintana. Ultimately, toward the end of the year, he was back in there against lefties, just lower in the lineup, and even in the playoffs, they had him bat at 9th. Against the 2 lefties that they faced in Minaya and Quintana. So that's a reason why he's not a 5. Sal Frelick, is the power for real? Is this added muscle going to stick around all season long? And then finally, Oliver Dunn. He never faces lefties, but yet he's going to get the majority of reps at third base in the first 2-3 months of the season. As a left-handed hitter, you're going to face more righties naturally. That is so important to have production out of third base, given the great start that Joey Ortiz had last year.
All right, finally, I got 5 5s on the position player front. Christian Yelich, need I say more? Garrett Mitchell, talked about the excitement of having a full season from him. Joey Ortiz, my pick to click, my quantum leap candidate. Rhys Hoskins, bounce back candidate. We've talked to him already this spring. And finally, no duh, best catcher in baseball, William Contreras. That's a 5. Those 5 guys, you need production out of those 5 to make sure the season goes on. And their zip numbers are pretty good. William is still projected as the highest WAR player at 2.5 wins, but even Christian Yelich, coming off of back surgery, is projected at 2.5 wins. For 4 wins, I should say, for William Contreras, and 2.5 wins for Christian Yelich. And then Bryce Terang is projected at 2.5 wins. Those are the top 3 win producers on the position front for the Brewers, according to Zips. And I'll breeze through the pitching side because I don't want to go too long onto this. But on the pitching side, as far as the ones that are going to be available as 1 through 5, same things sort of matter here. Let's go through it. So let's go to the relievers here, and let's go to the arms, I should say. And let's start with a couple of relievers that are ones that are depth for the Brewers right now. First of all, Grant Anderson, Grant Wolfram, the Grants. They have options. They're going to start the year in AAA, but keep an eye out for them as depth that maybe flash out of nowhere like Jared Koenig did last year, and all of a sudden they were important pieces of the bullpen. So do not lose sight of those guys. Next on this list, as far as 2s and 1s, I should put DL Hall as a 1, but I really wanted to put him as a 2 just because he's on the 60-day injured list. Also a 1 is Carlos Rodriguez, maybe a 2 because you never know when you're going to need a spot start from him. He had a really rough spring. Maybe he gets right in AAA Nashville, but he's depth at this point for the crew. Next, the 2s that are actual 2s on this list. Robert Gasser is a 2 and not a 1, and here's why. By the end of the year, there's always a few guys' arms that are hanging. Maybe there's a major injury that happens to the Brewers. And if Gasser comes back as scheduled, hopefully by the end of August, that gives you 5 or 6 starts. That'll be very important to have at the end of the season, a guy that is fresh versus a guy that is hanging at the end of the season. Keep an eye out for Robert Gasser. He is going to be a 2 on the scale of 1 to 5. Next, I've got Elvis Peguero as a 2. That may seem harsh, but here's why. Elvis has another option year remaining. He's going to open the year on the opening day roster. However, he needs to learn how to pitch with inherited runners, and he needs to find his way to get righties out again. He had a really tough season last year against righties. I'm waiting to see how much leverage he's really going to see in the beginning of the season. And if he gets leverage in the beginning of the year, does he sink or does he swim? That's why he's a 2. He could easily be a 3 on my list, but I'm going to stick him as a 2 to make sure that it's A-okay. The next 2s on the list are Chad Patrick and Logan Henderson. It's not a diss to them. Again, we don't know how much the Brewers are going to need them this year, but having them around, they are more than depth. They are going to be asked to get big league hitters out at some point this year to make sure they get through the season. Now let's move on to the 3s. The 3s are the guys that everyday contributors, somebody that they need to make sure is good to go. Yoel Payamps makes this list. He had an incredible second half last year. I know he didn't cover first, but he's still so important for the Brewers. Nick Mears is on this list. I know he's injured right now, or at least recovering from his sickness. Nick Mears, a full season, not at altitude, get him right, see what he's capable of with that fastball-curveball combo. Man, I'm really excited for Nick Mears, and also I've hitched my wagon to him to see as somebody that the Brewers should have signed, and they did last trade deadline. Next on the 3s is Craig Yoho. Because he's not on the 40-man yet, I still snuck him on here. He is going to pitch leverage innings at some point this season for the Brewers. Next on the 3s, Jared Koenig. He doesn't have a defined role in the bullpen. Maybe he's the 8th inning guy by the end of the year, but he's more of a fireman in my eyes, and that's still a very important role, but the Brewers can create a fireman seemingly at will at any point this season. One more 3 to point out is Aaron Ashby, and it's because they have to decide, do they want to keep him as a starter, or do they want to keep him as a reliever like they did at the end of last season? If they keep him as a starter, definitely a 3. If they make him a reliever, he's like a 2.8 in my eyes. But Ashby, don't give up on Ashby, man. I really think that this is going to be an important season for Aaron, and if you get 4.5 good months out of Ashby, you're going to remember why the Brewers signed him in the first place. Because, a reminder, this injury he's dealing with is not arm-related. It's his oblique. And if you want to take a silver lining, that's certainly one in my eyes. Next up, One last three to point out here, and that's going to be Abner Uribe. Abner, again, the suspension at the start of the year. He's not going to be the closer, at least at the beginning, but I kind of view him in the same role that Trevor McGill was in last year at the start of the year, where it's like, hey, there's clearly a pecking order ahead of you as for leverage. Also want to see you prove it. I don't know if Abner is going to be the closer by the end of the year, or if McGill, is going to lock it down just like he did at the start of the year. But he's got the potential. The Brewers want to see him reach that potential. And I know Abner does too. I think he's super talented, and the Brewers can find a way to unlock that out of him. So that's it for the threes. Now we're getting into the fours and fives. These guys are going to be the most important arms for the Brewers this year. The first four I have, Aaron Savali. Sneaky, underrated second half last year for the Crew. I know the win-loss and the ERA isn't the sexiest thing in the world, but he found the cutter. He dropped a few curveballs from the moon this spring training. Seems like a pitch he really worked on all season long. Savali can eat innings, and that's what I'm excited for out of him, and that's why he's a 4. The next 4 on this list is going to be Brandon Woodruff. Woodruff is going to be projected to pitch at least 100 innings, hopefully, for the Brewers this season. And if they get 100 innings with a 4 ERA and he touches 97, 98 again, that is a successful season for Brandon Woodruff. If he's a 4 ERA and he's at 95, 96, still great year for Woodruff. If you get triple-digit innings out of him, that is huge, and that's why he's a 4 for me on my list, because they're not going to push to get that many innings out of him. Trevor McGill is a 4. Can he do it again, man? Can you do what you did in the first 4 months of the year last year while Devin Williams was injured and lock down that closer role to make sure the Brewers are good to go come the regular season? The next 4s may surprise you are the swingmen, Tyler Alexander, Connor Thomas, and Elvin Rodriguez. You need innings out of these guys, and they need to perform. If they do not perform, they are going to be optioned. I mean, Elvin's optionable. Connor Thomas cannot be optioned. Tyler Alexander cannot be optioned. You need to have these guys be successful, because that is a lot of innings that could go out the door if they are not successful in the big leagues. But that's where Woodruff comes in. That's where Tobias Myers, who's my next 4, comes in, because you need the innings from those guys to hide the swingmen if they struggle at the start of the year. So that's it for the 4s. Now, lastly, just a couple of 5s, and these should be pretty obvious. Nestor Cortez and Freddie Peralta. These are the 5s. These are the guys that you need to get 170 innings or so out of. They need to be qualified pitchers for your team. They might be the only qualified pitchers on your team. Savali might meet that as well, but you need to get 200 strikeouts out of Freddie. You need to get 180 innings out of Nestor for this season to be successful. That's why they are the most important pitchers on this team, because nothing is more important than starting pitching depth. Okay, that was a lot about the roster and keeping an eye on who's most important. Let's wrap things up here with just a silly little game, and then we'll get to our signature series that I'm pointing out. More, less, same. So more, fewer, same. I've got a few numbers from both offense and pitching. Let's start with the one that everyone wants to point out, home runs. What are you going to do? Oh, my gosh, Willie Adames is gone. That's 32 homers. What are you going to do to fix it? In total, the Brewers hit 177 home runs last season, which isn't a ton. Tied 16th in Major League Baseball last year. 177. And the way I'm defining same is within 10 in either direction. So they can hit 167 or 187. I'm defining that as within the same. And I'm going to lean there. I don't think it's going to be as drastically fewer home runs as some people think. I don't think they're going to be less than 165 home runs this season. I could see a kind of a repeat of 175 or so, maybe 185. I don't think they're going to suddenly hit 200 homers this year, but I don't think they're going to drop off as drastically as some prognosticators think they're going to. So I'm going to call that a same. As for team batting average at 248, that was tied 8th best in baseball. I'm also going to give that a same. I think it is going to take a step down to maybe like a 245. So let's call this within 3 on the margin of error. So anywhere from 245 to 251. But that's still a really good batting average in the modern era. That's 6 points above league average. Give me a same in that regard for the Brewers. On-base percentage, 326. That was 4th best in baseball last year. I'm actually going to go same but higher. I think they can be a 330 on-base team as a club. I really do believe that. I think they're going to be one of the best on-base clubs in baseball. Slugging percentage could be a different story. A 403 slugging last year, which was tied 12th. I'm just going to go ahead and flat out say less. I know I just talked about that with the home runs and how valuable that they still have guys that can hit homers. If they get to 400 in their slugging, I think that's going to be a really successful year, but I can very easily envision a 395, a 398 out of the Brewers as a team from their slugging percentage this year. Next two are pretty easy. Stolen bases and walks. Stolen bases, they had the second most last year, 217. Give me the over. Give me 225 or more. I really do think the Brewers are going to steal even more this year as opposed to last year. And then walks, 597. They were third most in baseball. I think it's going to be another same number, maybe even a little bit more because you got a full year of Yelly. Churio's learning how to walk. Garrett's not afraid to take a walk. Sal's not afraid to take a walk. Bryce is not afraid to. You get what I'm saying. Williams not afraid to take a walk. They've got a ton of guys that know the strike zone. Now over to the pitching side. ERA as a team, a 3.65 team ERA, which is fifth in Major League Baseball last year. I see that as a little higher this year just because of the questions with the starting rotation. Where are the innings coming from this season? I could see that up to a 3.7, 3.75, which isn't catastrophic, but I do think that number is going to be higher this season. Saves. 53 saves last year for the Brewers, tied for the second most in baseball. Is it going to be McGill for the majority of them? Probably. Is Uribe going to be available? Probably. Is Yoho going to be up at some point? Yep. 53 saves is a lot, but for a team that plays a lot of close games, I think it's going to be over 50 again for the Brewers, so give me a right around that same number, 53 saves. Strikeouts as a unit, 1,373. If you have a 1,500 strikeout season, that's a phenomenal season as an entire crew. But granted, that number continues to be eclipsed over and over and over again across baseball. The Brewers were 14th in strikeouts last year. I'm actually going to tick this over 1,400. I'm going to call higher on this because I think Freddie's going to have a better year, knowing what you have with Tobias Myers, knowing what you have with some of the pieces in that bullpen. Give me more strikeouts for the Brewers this year. Quality starts. This is maybe the most important number for the Brewers pitching staff. They had 41 quality starts last season. So roughly 25% of their games had a quality start last year. That was second to last in baseball. That number has to go higher for the Brewers to be successful. A quality start, 6 or more innings, 3 or fewer earned runs pitched. That number has to go up for the Brewers to be successful. So take more there. And finally, losses saved. Essentially, comeback wins. It's an unofficial way to register that stat. 30 losses saved, meaning they came back to win if the starting pitcher was in line for a loss. They had the most losses saved in baseball last year, 30 of them. I think that number is going to stay the same too. This team's a cardiac team. They're not afraid to come back. Speed never has a bad day. They have a variety of ways to make comeback victories. Okay, those are my more or less sames. Let's wrap things up here with my signature series to keep an eye on for the Brewers this year. Taking a deeper dive into the schedule real quick, have you noticed what the month of May looks like for the Crew? They have series in order against the Astros, the Rays, the Guardians, the Twins, the Orioles, the Pirates, the Red Sox. And when the month starts, they got one with the Cubs. May is going to be a gauntlet as things look right now. Do not panic if they have a 500 record in May. That's quite frankly the goal. If they can be 500 through May, they are keeping afloat. You're going to find out real fast what this team is made of in May if the starting pitching is back on track because of some of those series. But let me pick out 2 signature series each month, not necessarily just divisional matchups, but signature series that I think will be great matchups, things to keep an eye on that we like, perk up. That's going to be a really important series to keep an eye on. Aside from the obvious of opening day this weekend, Arizona. Brewers go there 2 weeks in, second road trip of the year. Arizona over the weekend, April 11th through April 13th. And then at the end of the month, they go to St. Louis. First chance you see the Cardinals. Who knows what they're going to look like at the end of the season. You see them a lot in September. So this is the first time you see them. So I've got Arizona and St. Louis as my 2 signature series for April. Then we go to May. May, the Cubs, first matchup with the Cubs on the year. First weekend, first midweek, weekend in May. It's up here, May 2nd to May 4th. And then at the end of the month, Memorial Day weekend, it's those Red Sox, May 26th to May 28th, with the aforementioned tough series in the middle of that month that we'll find out what the Brewers are made of. In June, over a weekend, the Padres come to town, June 6th through June 8th. The Padres, is their pitching going to hold up? That's a big question for them. And then the border battle with Minnesota in Target Field, June 20th to June 22nd. That's a weekend series there in the Twin Cities. Keeping an eye on that for June. Then for July, it's the rematch of the wild card, but this time in Queens. Mets, Brewers, July 1st through July 3rd. And then also, coming out of the All-Star break, the Brewers open the second half in Los Angeles to take on the Dodgers. That is July 18th to July 20th. Next up, we go into the dog days of August. You go to Atlanta. That is going to be hot, 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 just like last year. August 4th through August 6th, a midweek 3-game series against the Braves. And Willy Adames' return with the Giants coming to town August 22nd to August 24th. Those are my 2 signature series there. And then finally, in September, the Phillies have an odd series where they play 3 games in 4 days. They play on Labor Day. They get Tuesday off. Then they play back-to-back games. That's the end of 19 games in a row for the Crew, that right before Labor Day. That's going to be really important to see how the Brewers are holding up by that point. So that's the first week, Labor Day week, against the Phils. And they go to Texas a week later for a midweek series against the Rangers. And they're my pick to win the AL West. So keeping an eye on what the Rangers are doing in the second half. That's my list of signature series to keep an eye on, aside, of course, opening day finally upon us. That was a long, long solo episode of a season preview here for the Crew. I still hitch my wagon to this team. I still believe they're going to hit better than people give them credit for. I still believe they should be the favorites to win the Central, not what anyone else thinks with the Cubs. The Cubs got better. I am not denying that. The Cubs have absolutely gotten better. But the Brewers have stayed the same. I know they lost Willie. I know they traded Devin. I still believe the Brewers should be considered the favorites for the division, and they should be treated as such. This is going to be a year that maybe the division is a little more of a competition. You know, aside from the Cardinals, you already talked to them at the top. The Reds are better. You know, they're healthier, right? They got McClain back. Ellie's looking like he's going to take another leap forward this year. They've got some decent starters, but their bullpen's still not great. Pittsburgh, what more needs to be said about Paul Skeens and that rotation? Not good vibes coming out of Jared Jones' camp right now if he needs Tommy John surgery. And then, of course, the Cubs with Kyle Tucker, with the infield prospect and Matt Shaw, with PCA probably having a breakout season for him. I'm so excited for all of this. I think there are 4 legitimate teams that could win the division, but they should all be chasing the Brewers, in my opinion. I'm ready. Let's do this. Opening day tomorrow here, WTMJ. I've got pregame coverage for you tomorrow. First pitch scheduled for 2:10 Central Time. And then no live postgame, but we'll have Brewers Weekly, 8 o'clock live on WTMJ. And then we're back on Saturday and Sunday. This was self-produced, so thank you for sitting back and listening to this season preview. Man, I can't wait to see Jackson Churio receive MVP votes. Nestor Cortez have a great 1-year, legendary season with the Brewers, and have him shut down the Yankees on Saturday. That'd be cool, right? Hey, if it was that easy, everybody would do it. Can't wait. It's going to be a long season. We'll be with you for every step of the way. My name is Dominic Cotroneo. Looking forward to a great 2025 season here in Milwaukee, right here in home of the Brewers, 620 WTMJ. Until next time, keep on swinging.